This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman.
This is George Newbern, the voice of Superman.
And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam.
Streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 323 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me, my good friend and good brother, it's Liam. Liam, we are continuing here in our Elseworlds month as we're tackling the recently debuted. It's probably old news now. Like it's old hat. Like that's 2, 3, 4, 5 news cycles ago at this point. But the recently debuted, and we are still extremely excited. And it seems like based on how many new listeners we seem to have attracted, that there are plenty of people interested in Batman Caped Crusader. So we will continue here in our month of Elseworlds reviews as we review episode 3 of the series, which introduces yet again one of Batman's classic rogues. And of course, it's not just a rogue; it's a romance. It's Kite Man. No, it's not. It's not Kite Man. Still not Kite Man. We are introducing Catwoman with this week's episode.
Absolutely, one of the big A tier, maybe S tier. I don't understand the difference, but
S goes above A, even though it's not in alphabetical order,
right,
in those rankings. So you're right. You got it.
Correct. So S, yeah, a very top level Batman character. As you mentioned, one that is often tied to him, not just as a rogue in the rogues gallery, but also as a romantic interest. So a lot to get into with today's episode, The Kiss of the Catwoman.
That is right. And before we get into discussing our own synopsis, as well as delivering our scores for the week, we'll go ahead and get the official Internet Movie Database synopsis for this week's episode, which of course is brought to you by, as it is each and every week, the Pod Tower. Head over to youtube.com/the Pod Tower today and subscribe. And not only can you access our entire back catalog, all previous 322 standard episodes, as well as bonus episodes and other episodes that we've recorded on spin-off series. You also get the entire Tim Talk podcast backlog category, backlog library. They also covered every episode of the DCAU and a bunch of other stuff as well. And you get the ongoing series from our friends at the very popular YouTube channel, the Watchtower Database, and their ongoing podcast series as well. So head over today to youtube.com/the Pod Tower and subscribe.
That is right. So this is the synopsis for the episode Kiss of the Catwoman, which is has a story credit by Ed Brubaker and Bruce Timm. Never heard of them. And teleplay by Adama Ebo and Adane Ebo. Apologies, I'm sure I'm butchering those. Directed by Christopher Berkeley, with music by Friedrich Weidman and animation by Studio Greta, or Greta, I don't know. A lot of mispronunciations, let's just assume. But that synopsis reads as such. Selina Kyle turns to a life of crime as the daring Catwoman after her multi-millionaire father goes to prison, leaving her strapped for cash.
That's like the first. I mean, it is a synopsis.
It's a blurb. Yeah, I mean it's not great. That is what's going on in the episode. We have we'll get into it. There's a little more to it. There's a lot more to the Batman side of things. If you're one of those people who thought Batman or Bruce Wayne wasn't in the show enough in the first couple of episodes, good news. He's in a lot more this week. So a lot to dive into.
That's right. Batman fans rejoice. There is plenty of Batman in this Batman show today. So let's go ahead and jump into our synopsis, our own version of the synopsis, Liam, as we open up in a Gotham museum and we see a display that's going on. We see a listing of rare jewels currently on display in the Gotham Museum, and there's some sort of event that's occurring that has attracted a rather large crowd, including the press, who are there to discuss the opening night of the display of jewelry. And that's where we do indeed see for the very first time someone who is identified as Miss Selina Kyle, although Before that, we see a photographer by the name of O'Brien that is taking photographs, and he will once again pop up again later on in the episode itself. But it's kind of important here because this character, Eel O'Brien, you may not know that name specifically, but you certainly know his alter ego in DC Comics history, that being Plastic Man. So we have one of our first crossover cameo appearances from a potential down the line ally, maybe for Batman here, depending on what happens. But we shall see. But at least including a familiar name there in that way. But as we mentioned at this museum exhibit that's showcasing the jewelry, we learned that part of the jewelry exhibit belongs to Bruce Wayne and happens to be the necklace that Martha Wayne was wearing on that one fateful night. And we see Selina herself is admiring the jewelry, and that allows an interaction between Bruce and Selina for the very first time.
Now these are pearls. Hard to imagine anything more beautiful.
Not that hard.
I'd love a set just like these.
Should I be worried?
Why, Mr. Wayne, I have no idea what you mean.
Well, I hear things tend to go missing around you, Miss Kyle. A lot.
What can I say? I like nice things, and sometimes they accidentally come home with me. But really, most of that talk is just gossip. So I've had a few slaps on the wrist in court. What girl hasn't?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you should buy me a drink sometime.
Should I?
Yes. I mean, I'm practically the only eligible woman in Gotham that you haven't taken out. I'm tempted to take it personally. Besides, we have so much in common. You know, the whole wealthy orphan thing.
Your father's in prison for tax fraud.
Well, I know it's not exactly the same, but still. I bet we have more to talk about than most of the floozies I see on your arm.
We, in the midst of this, she mentions that she and Bruce are so much alike, and that they're both orphans. And Bruce happens to mention that while he himself obviously is an orphan, she is only orphan in name because her father is in jail because of tax evasion. So we see that maybe Bruce is taking that to heart a little bit, which may explain why he was so very riled up at the next moment, which we cut back to a pair of journalists that are making notes about the Wayne's jewelry collection, mentioning that the pearl necklace was sort of a target on the back of Martha Wayne, that she should have known better. Walking through Crime Alley with that necklace on, she should have known that she was making herself a bit of a target for crime, which, yes, absolutely. This is like, I saw people on the cesspool Twitter X this week being like, yeah, finally somebody pointed it out. Like, the rich people shouldn't be walking through the bad crime area wearing all this jewelry. It's like, yeah, but that's also kind of known as victim blaming, from my understanding. Yes. So, yes and no. Yes and no, we say. And let's just say Bruce doesn't take kindly to this victim blaming very well, as the next thing we know, the gentleman has a tap on his shoulder and is met with a fist across his face. And Bruce is standing there over him. And right place, right time, the gentleman and fellow journalists were able to snap a photo, which happens to make the front of the Gotham Gazette the very next day. And we learned that as a part of his legal agreement, he was required to head to a therapist, a psychologist, to be evaluated.
Anyway, that's what happened. And I guess my lawyer worked something out with the district attorney's office, which is how I ended up here on your couch, Dr. Quinzel. I mean, metaphorically.
The couch is way more comfy, Bruce. Go ahead. Give it a sit.
That's all right. I don't intend to take up much of your time, Doc. I'm not exactly the belly-aching type.
Oh, no, of course. But there is this issue of felony assault, and a bit of belly aching was part of your no jail time deal.
Right, but
All you have to do is a few weeks of therapy. Easy as pie, hun. So, given the stakes, I think we should take as much time as we need. Love that we're on the same page. Now, have you ever found yourself resorting to violence in other situations?
What? Come on. Do I look like a guy who goes around blowing his top?
And that's where we kind of see our next scene open up, where we learn that that Bruce is headed to speak with a therapist who we'll talk about in just a little bit here. But we learn a little bit more about Selina's what's going on in Selina's life at this point as she heads back to her own mansion and speaks with her help. She has what's the term for a female butler? Is it maid? I guess maid.
She's just. I mean, that's definitely like a maid outfit she's in, like an old French maid's outfit.
Classic French maid. Although she's definitely sounds German. I don't think she. Greta is not French, but she's wearing the classic French maid outfit.
We're in the 1930s too. Ooh.
Ooh, yeah. Ooh. Oh, good point. Yes. Let's not ask any of Greta's feelings on politics or. That's right. So Greta is there, and Greta shares with Miss Kyle that more bills have arrived. She's instructed to put them with the rest. Greta throws them into the fireplace, which I thought was a fun gag. And we learn that Selina is in deep debt at this point, and not only does she have bills that are coming from collectors, but we learn a little bit more about the fact that her father seems to have left her somewhat what she claims destitute, despite the fact that she's living in a giant penthouse with multiple stray cats. She's a cat lady. We learned that very early on here. She's got like 50 cats hanging out in her palatial estate, and Greta is upset that not only is the food bill continuing to grow with every stray that Selina brings home, but she herself has not been paid in several years, in fact.
There were more bills today.
Just put them with the others.
Miss Selina, they're going to turn off the electricity soon. And I, too, would like to be paid again someday.
Hey, it's not my fault Daddy left us here with Bupkis, is it?
Well, can you at least stop bringing home strays? The cat food bills alone are bankrupting us.
Oh, stop worrying, Greta. I'll take care of everything. Somehow.
Yes, your tone inspires much confidence in me.
You never talk back like this to Daddy. Don't think I'm not noticing that.
Greta is there working her tail off, but for no reward. So you gotta enjoy that. But it sets up. Selina is interested at this point in figuring out, after she sees a headline in the Gotham Gazette with a drawing of the Batman, she gets herself a little idea of how maybe she can capitalize on the Batman's inspiration for donning a costume and set out on her own evening adventures with her own costume. So we figure out that, as we mentioned, Bruce was forced to go to court-ordered psychotherapy, and we learn that his therapist is Dr. Harleen Quinzel. So if you watched any of the previews for the show, we knew that Harley Quinn, or Harleen Quinzel, would be in this, and a lot of the interviews had already set up that she was going to be Bruce's psychiatrist. And so Bruce is headed into a session with her. He explains to her that he's not the type of guy. He even asks her, do I look like the kind of guy that goes around blowing my top? That he explains that it's a one-off, that he just lost his temper because of the guy's disrespectful comment about his deceased mother. And we learn that Harley is looking to crack the proverbial egg that sits in front of her, that she insists that Bruce has probably shoved down a lot of his childhood trauma. And it's at this point that we get what is the beginning of a series of flashbacks of that one fateful night that we know, that one bad day, if you will, that ultimately sets up our origin story for this version's of Bruce Wayne's journey to Batman.
That tragedy in your childhood, it's obviously and reasonably a tender spot. Would you like to talk about what happened to your parents?
No. Look, that was a long time ago, and it was awful, but I'm a grown man now. I don't really think about it anymore.
You know, repressed trauma is something you might not even realize you're dealing with until something happens. Repression is kind of like...
Can you tell us anything about the gunman? Like what color his hair was, or his eyes? Anything at all?
No. It was too dark. I couldn't see his face. I didn't even see the gun.
Detective, the boy's been through enough. I really must insist I take him home now.
Yeah, okay. I'll be in touch with any news.
Thank you. How was therapy, Master Bruce?
Waste of an hour. Doctor thinks she can get into my head. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, we see a young Bruce being interviewed by a detective in the alley as he asks him if he remembers anything that happened during the incident, if he remembers the person's face or anything. And Bruce, with a blank stare on his face, tells the officer no, he doesn't remember anything. He can't even remember the gun. And we see then younger Alfred sort of take him away and tell him he's going to take him home. And then whilst Bruce is flashing back, we cut back to present day. As you mentioned, Catwoman, now suited up in full costume, goes about taking a few jewels. And we see a great, they do the classic spinning newspaper gag. So she goes on a little bit of a spree, and enough that not only is she catching the cops' attention as she arrives at her latest spot, she seemingly outwits them all, including Flass and Bullock, who are on the scene. Flass getting a kick in the chest, and Bullock getting the worst of it as he gets a slash across the face with her. They're not really like they're not like the glove claws like in previous version. I guess she just has really sharp fingernails. I don't know. I guess.
Sure.
I mean, maybe they're put-ons. I don't know. Can you just buy like knife fingernails? I don't know if those exist or not, but I guess they do in this show. Anyway, as she's escaping, she's able to outwit the cops, but not Batman, who arrives, and they have a little bit of fisticuffs, and she actually gets the better of him briefly, but is quickly tied up as he throws a couple of bolas and ties her up and drops her right there in the alley. And as she's being taken away, she makes note of the fact that she didn't realize he had toys, as she calls them, or tools. Mm-hmm. And as she's being loaded into the car, she's unmasked, so everyone now knows that it's Selina Kyle.
Oh, hi. Oof. You're 1,000 times sexier than that sketch in the paper.
Who are you?
Catwoman, dear. Obviously. What can I say? You inspire me. You have toys?
Hey, Flass, it's that Selina Kyle broad. The high society klepto.
So it is. What are you doing, lady? You trying to move up to the big time?
That was kind of the plan, yes. Nice car.
And they put her in the back of the police car, and as they're about to drive away, she sees the Batmobile pulling out of the alley. So she remarks that he not only does he have those wonderful toys, as a different villain once said, but he also has a pretty cool car. So she's making those mental notes as we cut to her, I guess her hearing, where we see that she's being sort of reprimanded by the judge. And the judge asked District Attorney Harvey Dent, making his his weekly appearance, and if they're going to bring charges. And Dent says that ultimately they can't prove that she was the one taking all of the jewels, because Batman was also at the scene, and since there's no physical evidence, which is a little bit of a shock and a little bit of news to Bullock and Flass, who are sitting in the courtroom, with Bullock still having her claw marks across his face. But he decides he's going to let her go and give her, as they say, another second chance, because it sounds like this is not the first time that she has been brought in front of a judge. So with that in mind, she leaves the courtroom, and we see Barbara Gordon, making her one scene weekly appearance guaranteed, arrive to discuss things with Dent. She harkens back to, I guess, what would have been the first episode of the series, about how, when it's one of one of Barbara's clients who can't really afford to pay their way through the justice system. Dent's ready to throw the book at him, but now that we have a high society person in the same spot, he's not interested in pursuing charges because there isn't enough evidence. Harvey kind of laughs it off. Barbara asks him if she's a campaign donor, and he says no, and but kind of says he wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that either, I guess.
So when it's my clients, you're gunning for jail time. But when it's the rich and famous, they get a break. What is she, Harvey? A campaign donor?
Oh, come on, Barbara. Do you really think I'd sink that low? Well, maybe I would. If she weren't flat broke.
Oh, Miss Selina?
Not yet. I think we need to get some work done on the car.
Well, yeah, he's setting it's kind of some breadcrumbs saying that like she's flat. He mentions that she's flat broke, so she doesn't have any money to buy him. But after initially scoffing at the idea that he could be bought, he says, well, I guess I could be. Essentially setting up for a thread that's going to play out later in the series.
Absolutely. So I think here we get some more flashbacking as we see Alfred driving young Bruce home. And as he's, again, trying to comfort him, that's kind of seems to be a theme of these flashbacks, is Alfred trying in vain to comfort a young Bruce. And as they continue driving on, we cut back to present day where Bruce is in another session with Dr. Quinzel, who is really kind of begins to take him to task. And over these couple of sessions that they have together, really ask him if she very quickly sees through what is a very paper thin Bruce Wayne persona, in that she feels like he is doing everything that he thinks people would expect a guy with his and wealth to do, but that it doesn't really seem like he has a lot of fun or is actually enjoying it. She mentions all of the different beautiful women that he's photographed with, and how doesn't ever seem to be a second date with any of them.
It feels so, I don't know, obvious. Almost a cliche. Maybe it's a way to shield yourself from further pain. It would be understandable if it was. That's a hell of a thing to go through as a kid.
Or I'm not repressing anything and I just have a lot of disposable income and a very active social life.
Oh, yes. I've seen you in the society pages. You and some model, you and some movie star. But Bruce, how many second dates do you have?
Is this therapy or church?
Come on. You run around acting like Gotham's happiest, randiest bachelor. But are any of these women more than just an accessory for you? Is there ever any love there, or even lust? Or are you just going through the motions, being the person that everyone around you expects you to be?
I'm just playing the field, Doc. That's not a character flaw, is it? Life is just different for people in my position.
Once again, Bruce kind of blows this off and is back on the trail of Catwoman soon after, as she is let out of prison. I might be jumping around also because some of these therapy scenes run together. Mm-hmm. So if you're listening to this and you're like, that doesn't happen in that order, just there's a bunch of Bruce therapy scenes, there's a bunch of Catwoman scenes that kind of could just go back and forth. So if we're mixing them up, I apologize, but they all happen, trust me.
That's right.
But yes, we cut back to Selina, who is being picked up by Helga in the car, who asks her if they're going back home, but Selina says nope, they have a few modifications to make for the car, as she has learned from her first encounter, and she's ready to go back out on the town once again.
That's right. And again, I think this might have been right after the court scene, but there was a brief little interaction we get where Harvey Bullock is getting chided by another member of the GCPD about the fact that his case was dismissed, essentially, and that it was the evidence is right on his face because he's got the claw marks, and how bad of a cop does he have to be? And he kind of grabs this guy that's teasing him by the lapels and threatens him, and Flash steps up and says, no, tells him to let him go, and then kind of insinuates that she's not going to be running around for long. So, as you mentioned, once she's released and back out on the run and making her adjustments to her car, we see that Catwoman is once again back out on the street and up to her old tricks, and we see her in someone's bedroom at night taking jewels out of a safe. And not only does she make off with the jewels, she also makes off with the cat that belongs to the owners of said jewelry. And as she's out on the rooftop, Batman appears and is already fast on her tail, and a chase sequence appears that we'll talk a little bit about in visuals, I'm certain, across the rooftops and down into an alley. It's there where Batman, or actually before we get to the alley, as they're jumping across the rooftops, Catwoman's heel gets caught on the ledge of the roof and she begins to fall. Batman has to save her, shooting a grappling gun onto the roof, and is able to descend and save her just in time. And she shares a little kiss with him in a scene that, again, we'll talk about in visuals, that is awfully familiar for longtime Batman the Animated Series fans. But as Batman descends to the ground with her in tow, he pushes her off and tells her that she is wasting his time.
Stop. You're wasting my time.
Well, why do you keep chasing me then? I wasn't sure that these would actually work, but holy mackerel.
And she pulls out a pair of electrified brass knuckles, which I know we said technology-wise we were trying to stick to realistic things here in the 1930s. I don't know how realistic a pair of electrified brass knuckles is, even in the year 2024. But if they exist, I think that would be a cool thing to own. I'll just say that. But she pulls out the brass knuckles, wallops Batman, who is not quite ready for them, and escapes further down the alley. And as Batman gives chase, we hear a deep growl, which I never know where to put sound design, so I might as well mention it here. But I love that this Catmobile cat car sounds like a giant panther or a lion or something like that. When she starts it up, it gives it this real deep roar that comes out of it, and the lights flip on, and coming out of it is the classic Catwoman. Is it called the kitty car? Is that right?
I think it's been called that. I think it's just been called the cat car at some point too. Okay. So, right. But yes, yeah, very classic sort of golden and silver age Catwoman vehicle here.
Well, she's souped up her previous vehicle, and she is ready to make her escape out, and she does just that. She's able to get out of Dodge. And we see Batman back in the Bat Cave once again, frustrated at the fact that he's lost Catwoman, is seemingly foiled again. She continues to go on her crime spree. Interestingly enough, on this newspaper that Bruce is holding, by the way, you see the headline is that her spree is continuing, but underneath of that, there's a little headline that says new leads in arson investigation. So a possible thread for next week's episode listed here. Alfred takes note and says, maybe Batman should give this one a rest and let the police handle it, because she's not quite a villain. She's more of a nuisance than anything. And he encourages and reminds him that Bruce Wayne has appointments that he has to keep that day.
Maybe it's time to retire upstairs. Try and get at least a few hours sleep. Perhaps you can let the police handle Miss Kyle. She's only a jewel thief after all, not really a villain, sir. And Bruce Wayne does have appointments today, so some
appointments?
Sleep.
That's a good idea. Get the limo out. I'll get changed.
Are you certain there's nothing I could do to change your mind? The show was meant to run for another 3 weeks, and...
No, I'm afraid I have to insist. And I'm sure the other families will agree with me. What with this Catwoman character out there.
Can we at least have the weekend?
He decides that he's going to set a trap for Catwoman at this point. He contacts the Gotham Museum where the jewelry exhibit currently is, and under the guise of being afraid that the jewelry is going to be stolen, he lets the museum curator know that they're going to pull all of the the jewelry, everybody that's lent jewelry to the museum is going to pull it, and the jewelry curator or the museum curator asks if they can have the weekend to continue displaying the items, which he agrees to, knowing that it would probably be announced over media, which it does. We see that the right away it goes on the radio. They announce that this is the final weekend to check out the jewelry and knows that the trap is set. They decide at that point, Bruce is pretty pleased with himself and tells Alfred to take him home, but Alfred reminds him he's got one last meeting, and that is with Dr. Quinzel once again. So we get our final, what ends up being our final session here between Bruce and Harleen. Bruce is pretty giddy and appears to be pretty openly happy about the fact that this is their last session together. He's pretty excited to get this over with and get her to sign his paperwork saying that he's completed all the sessions. Dr. Quinzel says that she would recommend that they continue seeing each other, and that she clearly, I think they're laying the groundwork here for her return later in other episodes, but she has a fascination with what Bruce is hiding. She mentions that he's got walls that are too tall, that are built up, that she can't climb over, so she knows that she needs more time to investigate what this rich man's deep, dark secrets are.
You know, this is my last session.
Is it? Time has just flown by.
And I really want to thank you, Dr. Q. I'll admit I was a bit resistant to this, but I feel like it's been really helpful. Really?
You know what, Bruce? I'm going to sign your paperwork.
Oh gosh, thanks, Doc. I really...
Because I don't think you're a danger to yourself or anyone else. But I also don't think that we've made any progress together. It's funny. Most of my patients are all too willing to dump their guiltiest secrets and darkest desires on me. If I didn't know any better, I'd think you really are the shallow cardboard cutout you pretend to be. But I do know better. Your walls are just too high. Much too high for little old me to get through. But I'm willing to keep going. I'm willing to try if you are, Bruce. Your court-ordered sessions are over, but I think you should continue on as my patient. Now, doesn't that sound like fun?
Thanks for the offer, Doc. But I'm all aces now. I promise. So, can I get you to sign these, then?
And it's very clear at this point that he's done with the session, and she agrees to sign his paperwork at that point and kind of stops putting up a fight. Bruce gets back into the car with Alfred, celebrating in the very serious way that Bruce does, that this was the last session. And Alfred, seemingly a bit upset and concerned at this point, asks Bruce if maybe he would consider continuing his therapy, thinking that it might be useful for him to perhaps deal with some of the trauma that he's experienced. But Bruce is having none of that and bulldozes right over him.
Alfred playing the part of Reddit.com this week. Batman should go to therapy. No, this Batman definitely should be in therapy. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I agree.
But it is very funny because, again, that's just one of those topics that will be eternally recycled on the social media, comic spaces.
I felt very much that the part of Harley Quinzel was also played by some stand-up commentators too, but I won't go there. What's interesting though is we do get a flashback of Bruce on the night of his parents' murder at this point, where we see Alfred sleeping in his bed, and we see Bruce in his own bed, and all of a sudden he's sort of awakened by the sound of the gunshots going off that he clearly witnessed, sort of ringing in his brain. And this causes Bruce to get up and walk into Alfred's bedroom in a scene out of a horror movie, stand at the foot of his bed, stare into Alfred's eyes and say that he's going to make them all pay, and Alfred is going to help him do it. And it's truly horrifying.
They're going to pay.
They?
All of them. I'm going to make them pay. And you're going to help me.
Is a very good glimpse into the psyche. It's our kind of first this episode gives us the first glimpse into the psyche of who this Batman is and how disturbed, I would say, this version of the Dark Knight is.
Yeah, kind of this whole, between the flashbacks and the various Harley scenes, as we mentioned, it's all kind of about how he never processed it, even in the way a child possibly could, much less discuss, much less does he want to discuss it all these years later. But you see, even he lies to the detective in the first flashback. He tells him he doesn't remember the guy's face or the gun or anything about what happened. And then you see he has a very clear image of who the person was and what the gun looked like before he marches into that's more of a visual note perhaps, but it's a storytelling beat, so it's fair to, I think, mention here. So it's and that's sort of that's the tragedy of the character that I think that this series is really examining, that he closed himself off at 8 years old, or 10, I don't think they specifically say his age, but let's assume 8, because I feel like it's usually 8. And yeah, now we're seeing the results of this, 20 some years later, as he is dressing up like a bat and punching criminals, and not just criminals, as we'll get to as we arrive at our finale. So from there, he goes and he happens upon Eel O'Brien, as mentioned, Chekhov's Eel O'Brien, who was introduced in the first scene, as you mentioned, and who is taking some pictures of, I believe he's a city councilman who seems to be canoodling with someone who is not his wife. And Batman appears next to him and threatens him a little bit and tells him that he wants him to come and photograph a specific event for him. So we arrive at the museum as Catwoman has heard on the radio that this huge display of Gotham's wealthiest family's jewels will be taken away after the weekend. She heads right to the museum that very night to try to steal everything, starting with those Wayne pearls. And Batman quickly arrives behind her, and we see that Eel is photographing everything from a perch a little bit further away. They exchange some more witty banter, but this time, as Catwoman quickly points out, she did not come alone, as she begins to make a run for it, and she has a panther.
Where did she get a panther?
It really
She's
does.
Flat broke, but she went out and bought a panther.
I guess the jewels that that she stole on her previous heists were enough. I don't know. Also, by the way, I don't know if we mention that she and Greta, but meanwhile, have moved into a much divier apartment. There's a scene where Flass and Bullock arrive at her old apartment, trying to arrest her after the second time that she escapes Batman, and the nice ritzy apartment is completely empty, and the doorman exclaims that she had moved out. So she's moved into her dingier apartment because she says that this is an area there where no one's going to care if what they're doing, and that no one in the area is going to be willing to talk to the cops. So as she is in this dingier apartment, she hears on the radio that this display is going away, which is how we arrive at the final scene. As mentioned, so she makes a run for it. Flass and Bullock also arriving on the scene as Batman drops a couple of, I guess, gas pellets. It's knockout gas that only knocks out the panther. I'm not sure how that works, but
it's panther repellent, I think.
I guess so. It's not labeled as such, but we'll have to assume that's what it is. As he's able to subdue the panther, but Catwoman has quite a running start on him. But as mentioned, Flass and Bullock arrive at the museum. They're able to wound her. They take a shot and wound her. One of the rare instances of blood on this show so far, ironically. Mm-hmm. And as she is wounded in the leg, Bullock pulls out the handcuffs like they're going to arrest her. But after already being embarrassed by her and by Dent earlier in the episode, Flass isn't really interested in seeing her make another perp walk. So he prepares, seemingly, to execute her.
We're not going to need those.
You saved me. I knew there was something. Ow! Hey! Not so tight! You know, you're really no fun at all.
No, I'm not.
And Batman is not taking too kindly to that. He really just tears into both Flass and Bullock, knocks them both out, and bandages up Catwoman's injured leg, and also handcuffs her to the side of one of these heavy end tables where they have things on display. So he pulls his little disappearing act and heads back out to the alley where Eel is waiting with the film reel. Eel asks him, well, I got photos of Catwoman stealing the jewels, because that was one of the things Dent said in the previous scene as well, was that they didn't have any evidence that she specifically stole the jewels. So Eel mentions that he does have that now, but that also this film reel contains a lot of shots of Batman beating up two cops, and asks him if he wants him to destroy the whole reel. We cut away to Catwoman first in the she's now in prison. She is calling Greta for help. She says she needs to bail her out, and that they need to they've confiscated all of her stolen goods, but that perhaps Greta can still sell a couple of the items that were her dad's, some of the big gold statues in the house. And we see that Greta is way ahead of her, though perhaps not in the way that we would have expected, as she has been fed up with Selina's antics, and says that she owed her 3 years worth of pay, and so she has sold all of those items, pocketed the money herself, and is leaving for a cruise within the hour. So Greta gets her happy ending, as Selina ironically remarks, "What a crook."
Greta? Finally. Listen, it's a disaster. They've got evidence, photos, the whole deal. So I need you to bail me out.
I'm sorry, Miss Selina, but that's not going to be possible. You have no money.
No, listen. Just hawk some of the paintings. And maybe that gold statue that Daddy loved. You know, the one with the ballerina up on her toes.
Yes, I know, Miss Selina. I already sold her and everything else worth a nickel that you owned.
What? Greta?
You owe me 3 years of back pay, so I'm collecting now. My cruise to the Bahamas leaves in an hour. Auf Wiedersehen!
Why, that little crook.
And then we have our final scenes here as we cut back to the Batcave, where once again Alfred sort of tries to broach the subject, both with Catwoman, who Batman says will probably be back someday, but at least they have a break from her particular brand of distracting crimes. And also he once again tries to broach the subject of perhaps additional sessions with Dr. Quinzel and how they could be helpful. But Batman, once again, just Stonewall master, the Kembe Mutombo of mental healing in this episode. Batman just slaps it down, says, "My coffee's cold, Pennyworth." And so Alfred sheepishly agrees to go brew him a fresh pot as the night continues on. And we kind of have this one little last note of a flashback as we see back on that night before the first flashback we had seen earlier. Seemingly, we see Alfred with the Wayne family car parked just outside of Crime Alley. He seems to be cleaning the windows, and then you hear two fateful gunshots, and he goes off running towards the scene as we fade to black this week.
Yeah. All right, Liam, let's go ahead and talk about our breakdown of the plot and give our scores for it. As far as the episode is concerned, tonally, I felt like it was a little bit closer to our first episode than it was the second episode that we reviewed. I think it's a little bit more focused as far as like the action beats at least are. It's a little bit more focused on the villain and the relationship between Batman and the villain. And when you break it down, it's not an overly complicated idea that Catwoman is a cat burglar and Batman wants to stop her. Right. I think what's interesting though is woven throughout the entire story is the elements of Batman's motivation for what he does, why he does it, his somewhat obsession, I think, as you pointed out before we went on the air, with Catwoman, and what drives that for the episode. I think there's probably multiple things that you could pull as far as themes go. I think one of them is perhaps trying to differentiate himself from Catwoman. He sees in that opening scene where Selina compares herself to Bruce that he's this, they're the same, they're cut from the same cloth. He immediately tries to differentiate by saying, well, you're not an orphan, I am an orphan. We then see him thinking about his his parents' death, how that's impacted him, continues to drive him. She mentions right off the bat, Catwoman does, in their first interaction, that Batman has inspired her. So he's very clearly, I think his motivation, as we see as young Bruce, is to bring justice, is to make people pay. So his versus just taking without any reason, he's determined to bring justice or make people pay for the crimes that they're committing. So he's trying to differentiate that. But she continues to kind of copy him, the Batmobile versus the cat car. You have, she's got, after she gets tied up with Ebola, she brings, the electrified brass knuckles. So there's this constant, maybe comparison that he's facing, where he feels like he needs to differentiate himself and remind himself of his motivation, which is this horrible thing that happened to him, and in some ways sort of justify why he does what he does, because he has Alfred questioning him the entire way about perhaps seeking some therapy to deal with the trauma in a different, healthier way. Harley Quinn, or Dr. Quinzel, is telling him that his avoidance of his trauma has led to this sort of going through the motions as a persona of Bruce Wayne, and he's kind of face to face with that. It's very interesting on that level, I think. But I think there's probably a couple of different themes that you could pull out here of what they're trying to, what the writers and director are trying to tell as far as the story is concerned here, with these flashbacks and the sessions with the therapist, and then kind of interjected with these comic book action scenes of Catwoman robbing people and Batman trying to foil her.
Yeah, I think there's also something, as we talked about, there's Harleen specifically questions his romantic relationships, how shallow they are, how he doesn't really even seem to be attracted to any of the women he's around in his Bruce Wayne guys. And then you do see, maybe not in the same overt, playful way that it is portrayed in something like Batman the Animated Series, or certainly in the comics, or something like that. But you do see that there is kind of an immediate change in him when he sees her, and when he starts to interact with her, up to the point where he saves her, and they have their kiss, and he's even kind of when he pushes her away, he's really stiff and weird about it. He's like, no, this is because he's never really had to be a real person when he's in the suit, right? This is right. It's pure id when he's in the suit of this mission that we see, as you said, in these flashbacks, this holy mission in his mind to rid the world of crime. So it's interesting to see the way that he reacts to her when he clearly does have, again, whether or not it's complete, it's multi-layered. I think, to your point, it is, yes, he is seeing the comparison of another wealthy person using their money to put on a costume, but instead of to help people or to hurt the bad guys, it's purely for a thrill and for personal gain, and how he, sort of has a detest for that. But then I think he's also sort of struggling with his own, for the first time, perhaps in a long time, he's feeling actual feelings again, and how annoyed he is. And when out, and you see that sort of manifest itself again when both Dr. Quinzel, and then much more so with Alfred, when Alfred tries to sort of broach the idea that he should continue going to therapy, or even that he should let Catwoman go. He just shuts it down completely, and it becomes this thing where I think because he's so sort of thrown off by her, he can't he can't rest. He can't let himself, he can't have peace of mind until he knows she's put away. Like if she's out there, it could be a temptation for him. It could be a distraction for him in a way that that none of the women that Bruce Wayne might date are for him. So I think that's a really interesting level to it too. I feel like this is like some Jungian stuff and some Freudian stuff at the same time here, that we're getting into some, the as far as his psychosis and the sort of psychosexual mind frame that he's in as he's dealing with emotions that he's either stuffed down or has perhaps in this version maybe never felt before. We don't know anything really about Bruce before he was Batman yet in this world, but beyond what we see in the flashbacks here. So it's really interesting how just generally kind of put off and thrown off by her appearance he is, and how he doesn't really know how to react to her. He just knows, I've got to focus on getting this done because it's distracting and I can't think about anything else until she's put away. So right. I think that's an interesting layer to it as well.
Yeah. And then I think you mentioned some of the dichotomy between him and Alfred, and where Alfred kind of fits into this scenario, and his sort of feeling indebted to Bruce. It's very clear as this series goes on that Alfred loves Bruce and is his father, or as a father figure, feels like a father figure to Bruce. It is not reciprocated, as we've discussed so far, that his relationship is very businesslike. It's very, Alfred is the help, and you do what I say, and you can give your input, but I'm pretty much going to shut you down very quickly and just tell you to do whatever. There's not the emotional connection that we're used to in a Bruce and Alfred relationship, or it's a one-way street rather. There's like an emotional connection that Alfred has with Bruce and desperately cares for him and desperately loves him and desperately wants the best for him, so a better life. But Batman doesn't have the warm and fuzzies for Alfred, thus far at least. So it's interesting that we kind of get a look at Alfred's role in this, and from the point that from that very first scene we see him trying to care for Bruce and taking him away from the cops when they're like drilling him, asking him for details about the murder suspect, and Alfred's look of general terror when Bruce is standing at the foot of his bed and tells him, I'm going to make them pay, and you're going to help me. And then, as you mentioned, his continual sort of referencing and trying to hey, maybe a little therapy could help. And Bruce just being like, no. And it's kind of shown, I think, in that final scene where we see why, we see that that's just how Alfred cares for Bruce in a way that, and feels maybe indebted to him because of what happened to Bruce. So he feels like it's his responsibility to stick with him, even if Bruce is going to continue to head down this extremely dark path to his own self-detriment, that Alfred owes it to him as that familial fatherly figure to stick by him so that he doesn't end up alone on that pathway, I guess. It paints Alfred as a very both sympathetic and kind of a tragic figure in and of himself, because you see that he sort of in that final flashback, it certainly seems like the implication there is that he was close enough by that he maybe blames himself for not being there to protect the Waynes, and how by that property that he couldn't protect young Bruce from becoming what he's become. And that's sort of that debt of, again, like you said, when and this is, I think, I'm sure very common for parents, for grandparents, whatever the relationship is, when you care for someone from when they were very young and you see them growing into something that you don't think is healthy, and how desperately you want to be able to pull them out of that. And you can't always, but it doesn't mean that you stop
being there for them, and it doesn't mean that you stop, loving them in this case. So it's an episode that I think really paints Alfred in a very interesting and kind of makes him a bit more three-dimensional of a character. He's less, a little bit more of that, and a little less of just being the snooty British guy who, bounces a couple of one-liners and exits. As much fun as that version of Alfred can be as well, I think seeing this version of him just so sort of put upon and distressed by by Bruce's sort of refusal to engage with these very repressed emotions. It's a really interesting way to look at Alfred as well, I think, as a character.
Agreed. Yeah. So as far as the rest of the episode is concerned, I think this version of Catwoman, I think setting her up as a rich person that's trying to maintain a wealthy lifestyle is certainly interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think that her interactions with Greta are pretty amusing. That's where the light stuff kind of comes into play. I don't think there's enough here to judge whether and where this like falls on the characterization and this version, whether or not I love or don't love this version of Catwoman. It's interesting. I'll say that it's interesting.
Yeah. It provides this episode specifically, she provides a lot of levity to counterbalance all of the look the little psycho boy stuff on the other side that we've just been talking about for several minutes.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think the fact that she's able to get under the skin of Bullock and Flass is fascinating, and kind of reveals more about them, how petty they are, and how they're hell-bent on, like, everybody in this story is kind of in it for themselves to a point. Batman, obviously, ultimately his goal is to bring justice for everybody, but it's from this motivation of, the trauma that he experienced. Catwoman's in it for herself to try and maintain the lifestyle that she was used to from a child, and because she has daddy issues, probably. You have Bullock and Flass who are in it for themselves because they were embarrassed that their colleague was calling them, bad cops for not being able to get a case conviction. Dent is in it probably to show leniency to the rich upper class, so that they know that he's somebody that if they vote for him, he's going to go easy on them. So he's in it for himself.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of selfishness in interestingly kind of contrasted here between the different characters. But I think at the end of the day, not going with the straight up, well, this is a romance. There's clearly some attraction there. It's more of an obsession with Batman. Why is Batman so obsessed with her? Maybe that's left up to our interpretation based on our conversation here. But I think it'll be interesting to see, as they say in the episode, Catwoman will be back. She's going to find a way to get free. She's going to, she'll find a way to go on another run. And what happens going forward with Batman and his interactions with this character, I think, is probably going to be more interesting, or make this episode more interesting once we get that down the road. I think there's certainly enough of the psychological side of things here to give this a couple of extra points from where I would normally be, maybe with just the plain story. So I ended up going with a 7 out of 10. I think there's enough here. I think with the peeling back of the layers of Bruce's psyche, kind of making us aware of what makes this version of him tick. I like that. I don't love that. Like, I don't have a problem with the Harley Quinn episode or how she's portrayed in that. I think there's some very interesting things in that and how they decided to characterize her.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that this version, essentially, like I said, it feels like a Redditor where they're like she is able to immediately cut to the core and figure out that Bruce is putting up a facade and that he's hiding something, and there must be something more to him. And although at the end she just kind of chalks up to him being rich and whatever that means and whatever his secrets are, she doesn't know that he's Batman, obviously.
Right.
But I don't love that she's like the smartest person in the room and seems to be outsmarting Bruce for the majority of it. So that I had a little problem with, but that's nitpicky. But I ended up giving 7 out of 10 for plot. I liked it. It's a fine episode. It's a fine introduction to this Catwoman character. And it does set up Harleen Quinzel and her role in the next couple episodes.
For sure. I went with an 8 out of 10, just 1 point higher. It's funny. I don't think this is disagreement alarm necessarily, but the things you said you didn't like about the Harleen character, I kind of enjoyed. Because again, to me, what it speaks to is that this Batman is not magic, always prepared, always smartest boy. As I feel Batman is sometimes overwritten at times in the last, maybe 30 or so years of comics, especially. So seeing this guy who feels like, no, I have this all figured out. Like you see him while she's speaking to him about, all of these things that she's noticed about his sort of persona, he's just staring at this file on her desk the whole time. And then you see when he gets picked up by Alfred that he's taken the file, and you think like, oh, okay, so he just nicked the file. But it's like, no, she would notice he was staring at it for like 5 minutes. It's like, to me, it's less, oh, she's so brilliant. To me, it's more like, no, Bruce Wayne this Bruce Wayne persona is so paper thin that anyone who paid like a clinical amount of attention to this guy would say this. It isn't necessarily that Harleen specifically. It's just, and yes, you can see that she has other motivations that we will uncover in later episodes as to why she wants to maybe deepen her connection and have Bruce be a recurring visitor to her office. There's a lot going on there that we'll get to somewhere down the line. But to me, I took it more as, no, it's just that he's so sort of closed off from the world that he doesn't realize how sort of paper thin he's made his public persona, because he sort of thinks so little of other people around him, or has so little care for what other people around him think, that he's just like, well, they're all idiots, they'll all buy this, I just gotta laugh and tell a funny story and get drunk once in a while and they'll buy it. Like, to me, it just feels like he's so sort of he just hasn't really, he's not playing the part well, I guess, is what I took from that. So to me, it wasn't necessarily that Harleen is uniquely smart or uniquely pegging him. It's like, I think anyone who paid it, it's just that nobody bothers to look beyond the surface of the spoiled rich kid. So I feel like that's more what they were driving at with that. But we could be wrong. So we'll see maybe if there are threads from this episode that pick up in that Harley episode, if and when we cover that one down the line. So yeah, that being said, 8 out of 10, good fun. And as an aside, like I said, more of a comedic dichotomy, but the other side of Selina and Greta's relationship as compared to Bruce's and Alfred's is quite a bit of fun. Greta's very, very pithy. Actually, I think more like Alfred in a lot of other media, where she's just constantly sort of cracking wise about what a waste of a life Selina is and how unappreciated she is, and then finally she has enough and takes all her money and leaves at the end. So even though that's played for jokes, it also kind of works as again sort of another, again, looking at that idea of Catwoman sort of being the other side of the coin to Batman, as far as the relationship she even has with her help in this case.
Yeah, you know what? We don't disagree on a whole bunch of things. That's why we break out the disagreement alarm. And I think while we didn't break it out for this episode, it is okay. It is a rare occasion, but we occasionally have different perspectives on it, and like and dislike things differently. It does happen occasionally, believe it or not. So,
and a lot of this, when you come to it's what do they call it? Death of the author. Like what I got out of it is, it's not said explicitly. It's what I am inferring in my personal belief. It doesn't mean that I'm right and you're wrong, or you're right and I'm wrong. It's like, okay, we both watched it and we both had a little bit of a different read.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, indeed. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which is going to be animation and visuals. And once again, do we have the same studios from the last 2 weeks?
This is Studio Greta, this is called. I could not find a lot of other work that they had done. I found like a sort of like a blank animation studio wiki page for them, but So I am unaware of what other projects they may have worked on, but yes, we have Studio Greta or Grida, Grida, and director Christopher Berkeley this week.
That's right. And so something I noticed when I was watching this episode before we went on the air, and I haven't gone back and looked at the other episodes. I'll note it next week. But something that I noticed, and then I'm like, okay, is this like a Mandela effect thing that like I just assume that this was how it's always been, or that it's the old animation did this way, and now I'm thinking that this looks weird because of that. And no, it turns out it was absolutely real. These characters do not blink. And in animation, like it's very rare that they close their eyes. And if they close their eyes, it's because they're like, there's like a scene where Catwoman's holding a cat and like snuggling with the cat real close. And she like closes her eyes as she leans in to snuggle. But the rest of the episode, the characters will just blankly stare forever. And it is extremely unnerving. And I don't think I checked out previous. I literally pulled up a clip of Cat in the Claw Part 1. Catwoman is blinking 100% of the time, like blinking. So I think that that's part of what makes this series feel a lot stiffer than beyond what we talked about in previous episodes, where obviously the budgets are probably smaller. That was lightning in a bottle. That's not something that's likely to ever happen before or again. It's just different how modern animation is done. However, it just makes these characters feel so stiff in some scenes that they're just standing there and their mouths are moving, but nothing else is moving. And that when the mouths are the only things that move, it can make things feel extremely low budget. So with that said, there was plenty of interesting things to observe and appreciate for this episode. So I won't say that this episode is complete trash or garbage because of it. But yeah, that was something that I noticed. I'm like, this is unnerving. Why don't these characters blink? Do they not blink ever? Nope, they blink. And most animation uses blinking to at least create some sort of flow in the animation out and make it feel like it's moving more than it maybe is. But I digress. As far as the episode itself, I think the highlights, certainly, maybe the highlight of the episode, quite possibly one of the highlights of the entire first season that we covered here, is the chase sequence across the rooftops. We talked about the chase sequence between Batman and Clayface from last week, and then we have another chase sequence here. And while this one is certainly shorter, it takes place in front of this beautifully lit neon sign that casts like this reddish pinkish highlight on the characters as they're running past. That leads into this sequence that I mentioned that was very, I felt very much evoked Batman the Animated Series. There's a sequence where Batman saves Catwoman and Cat in the Claw by swinging and catching her, and she gives him a kiss. That same thing happens here. Batman catches Catwoman falling off the building in this sequence, and instead of swinging across, he simply descends down the bat rope as she gives him a kiss. But I was like, okay, that's a remix, as this whole series is called here, of that original Batman the Animated Series stuff here that gives us a little bit of a homage, but it's not the same exact sequence over again. I love how that scene looks. It's such a unique, interesting visual background to have. It certainly evokes that Art Deco 1930s idea of having these gigantic neon letters on top of this building, and that's what lights the characters' way as they, traverse across the rooftops. But I thought that was fantastic. I think as far as cameos are concerned here, there's a couple of things. One is the drawing of Batman in the Gotham Gazette, which we pointed out it does come back to play later on. I think it's in the next episode. The police use it on the on their bulletin board, and it was in the trailer. But it is a direct image from Batman #1 that was drawn by Bob Kane. It's Batman sort of from a side profile with his cape splayed out and his hands kind of to his side kind of in this crouching position. It's very clearly a very memorable image from that Batman #1 that you can kind of see exactly what the artists were homaging for it. I love that they pulled that, they used that as what the artist from the newspaper drew what Batman looked like, because as we learned, there haven't been any photographs of Batman yet. So these are going off of these drawings of what people have reportedly seen. Speaking of seeing things, Batman or Bruce is watching television in one of the sequences while he's working out, and a very familiar host of the local Gotham News appears, I believe, unnamed, uncredited Summer Gleason making an appearance here. Someone certainly looks like Summer Gleason. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think she even has a little bolo tie, doesn't she?
Yeah. She's got. Well, I don't know if she's got the tie, but she's got that same thing in her. Like, I don't know what you call that.
The front curl thing?
Yeah, she's got the same hairstyle, that little, like, kerchief tucked into her, like, where the bolo tie would be. It's it's a pretty clear homage, if not named Summer Gleason. This is clearly a nod to the Summer Gleason character, who, of course, was an original character for Batman the Animated Series, and was the news reporter on that series as well. Yeah, that, and I think the highlights of the flashbacks, we talked about maybe in our first episode that we don't get the full sequence of Bruce's parents getting shot. We get much of the aftermath, and while we do get the visual of the killer stepping out of the shadows towards Bruce, and then of course we get the gunshots ringing out, and we get the aftermath of the police questioning him. The scariest thing has to be that shot of Bruce at the foot of the bed with the door open and the backlighting, and you just see his, like, grayscale skin and eyes just wide open, staring into Alfred's soul.
Yeah, that's the scene that's going to stick with me for a while, I think. It's interesting because, in a way, again, I hate to keep comparing it to the animated series, but it's hard not to, especially when the first words out of Bruce Timm's mouth were more Batman the Animated Series than Batman the Animated Series. It evokes kind of the same image to me from Mask of the Phantasm, #AquaPhantasmonth forever, where Alfred hands him the mask, and he looks, and you see the shocked look on Alfred's face when he puts the mask on. I'm not saying this moment matches that from, like, a thematic or a visual standpoint, but it does have that same feel to me of Alfred being like, oh, he's different now. Like,
right.
Like, this, I don't know what to do anymore. Like, I'm
well over my head.
Yeah,
like, I'm over my head at this point.
Like, yeah, he just, like, he has this look of, he's just gobsmacked as this little 8-year-old boy marches in and says, "I'm going to make them pay." And then, the visual, the kind of cut back to Alfred's face, his mouth is still kind of open, and you see Bruce's shadow, and then the shadow of the door closing. Really, really effective.
Yeah, and as far as the rest of the episode, as far as highlights that stood out to me, we already talked about the cat car and the visual homages. We talked a lot about in the bonus episode about Catwoman's Golden Age design. I personally would have preferred a Darwin Cook look, maybe something more akin to that than this. I mean, it fits the story because she's completely unserious about it, because she made her own costume. Like,
right.
She's a wealthy or former wealthy socialite that decided she was going to make herself a cat inspired costume because she likes cats.
Yeah. Right. She saw a picture of Batman or a drawing of Batman, and she's like, "Oh, I can do that. I'll just make it myself." Like, that sort of speaks to her very impulsive and, again, like you said, unserious personality.
Right. Which, juxtaposed against a very serious Batman, it's hard to marry the two of them together at times. But I think, having that as the backstory is the only way that this in any way makes sense. Because if this was a very serious person becoming a very serious cat burglar, for very serious reasons, it would feel very, very silly, I think. So they get away with it with the story accompanying it. I would like to see, I think it would be great, especially with Mr. Brubaker having worked on that Catwoman series with the late great Darwin Cook. It would be great to see them kind of morph towards something more conspicuous for
even like a steampunkier version of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you want to keep the sort of 1930s golden age aesthetic,
sure,
like it can be a little bit clunkier as far as like her gadgets and stuff, but
sure.
Yeah, I think you could evolve this. Like she doesn't have to be, in the dress with the cape and the high heels the whole series.
For sure. That design, by the way, as we mentioned, the great James Tucker, who used that same exact look for her Batman Brave and the Bold look. He's put out some sketches of that early Catwoman design, which are awesome. We shared them on our socials this week, so definitely check that out. Yeah, as far as the rest of the episode is concerned, I think your action beats are mixed in well with the serious bits, but so much of it is the dialogue between whether it's Bruce and Alfred or Bruce and Dr. Quinzel. It's a lot of it is that dialogue there, and it's more dialogue heavy than it is action beat heavy. The action beats certainly stand out and are interesting to look at. Batman fights a panther.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's okay. That's I think what anchors this is certainly the chase sequence across the rooftops. There are a couple of Batman jumps out of the shadows moments, which are kind of cool. And the fight sequence, I guess, in the museum to kind of crescendo is certainly interesting, but I ended up giving animation and visuals a 6 out of 10. I think it's a good episode, but it certainly, as we mentioned, relies a lot more on the plot and dialogue and what's going on in the doctor's office versus and the story that's being told. As far as, you know what though, with that Bruce, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. I'm changing live on recording here. I do like that. I think that haunting sequence of Bruce sitting at the bottom of the bed is enough to be like, yeah, this is really creepy and really drives home exactly what the story is telling here. So 7 out of 10 is what my score ended up being. What about yours?
Nice. Yeah, I went just a tick higher at 8 out of 10. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I think as far as like a scene where two characters have to be in motion, I kind of poo-pooed a little bit on the Clayface chase sequence over the rooftops in the previous episode. I thought this one was a lot better. Obviously, is highlighted, as you mentioned, by that sequence in front of the big neon sign. Yeah, I like the museum sequence a lot. Again, some interesting use. We talked about it. We actually have a reel up on our social talking about in the first episode how they broke all the old Fox Kids rules about broken glass and guns and blood and all of that. But here in this episode, they kind of do a fun throwback to that, which is when some of the fisticuffs between Batman and the cops is kind of off screen. Mm-hmm. and then you see him knock down Flass, and then when he comes to throw the big haymaker at Bullock, the fist comes right at the screen, and then you get the big white flash, and you just see Bullock crumple down after the shot. So I think they did some fun stuff with that. I loved the Bob Kane drawing of Batman, as you mentioned in the newspaper. Speaking of Bob Kane, the bit of him with the bandage on her leg is a direct homage to Batman #1.
Right.
Where he's actually unwrapping the bandage because she's hidden a jewel in it in that comic. But yeah, a callback to Catwoman's very first on-screen appearance. She doesn't suit up in that. She's not in the purple and green suit in that. She's just like a lady in a dress that they call the Cat. Mm-hmm. So, but that is officially her first appearance. So a fun little throwback. There's a somewhat famous panel you will see of him untying the bandage. So kind of a fun little reference to that as well. So I think those little visual homage, again, we kind of touched on already, but the cat car, really fun. The bit where she disappears she kind of pulls the Batman, she disappears under the shadows, and then you see the lights of the car also kind of look like cat's eyes and then he comes roaring out at him. So I think that's there's a lot of fun design work. So this might be more points for the visuals than the actual animation itself, as far as character designs, backgrounds, things like that. I love the some of the gaudy gold cat statues in her apartment, some of the background designs. There's some really, really good design work, even if the animation itself can be a little shaky at times, as we've noted over the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, but what's interesting, I think, is that we see here that it doesn't really affect the scores in a negative way. Like we've talked about it before, how sometimes you just have to adapt to the way that the new series looks, and there's certainly, once you've watched, I don't know, we're now 10 episodes into this.
Yeah,
we've watched all 10 episodes and we've reviewed 3 of them.
And to be fair, I purposefully did not go back and watch the chase sequences from Cat in the Claw, because I knew it would lower my score if I did. So like, I think it's also that we're trying our best as much as we can to look at this show for what it is, not for what it's not. I think, not to speak for you, but again, we will compare and contrast where needed. But I think in this case, I was like, I'm just that in my head, that sequence is so fluid and looks so great. And I was like, I can't go back and watch that before I watch this, because I will end up giving visuals like a 4. So I in this case, again, if you are deep in the weeds like we are on the original series and Batman Beyond and Justice League and all some of these great animation studios that they worked with over the years, this isn't TMS in 1995, unfortunately, or TMS in 1999, but still pretty good, and again a lot of credit to the character designs, the backgrounds, everything that they worked on in this episode, and some good stuff all around.
Absolutely. And speaking, just one last note here that I thought was hilarious. We've one of the cool things about social media, maybe the only cool thing about social media, is you sometimes get to see and interact and get behind the scenes things that you may never learn before. And so we've been able to discover a lot of the background designers, artists that worked on this, character designers. And one of the character designers that worked on this episode is Kat Hudson. And they posted earlier this week that one of the cats in the Catwoman scene, there's a particular cat that's it's orange and white. It's got this giant white belly. That cat was modeled after their real life cat, Tater Tot. So they got to make a design and implement it into the show, and now their cat is forever immortalized in animated form. Like that's pretty hilarious and awesome. So shout out to Tater Tot from Cat Hudson, putting Tater Tot immortalized forever in Batman Caped Crusader, with being one of the cats that Catwoman interacts with.
Absolutely.
All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which, of course, is music, once again done by Frederick Weidman for this week's episode. And Mr. Weidman is there's 3 as far as the soundtrack is concerned. There's 3 pieces for this week's episode that are featured there: Beautiful Stray, Calls of a Thief, Bad Bad Kitty. And it's interesting because I think one of those pieces is the one that actually plays during the initial trailer for Batman Caped Crusader. So it kind of sets the tone there. By the time you watch this episode, it was familiar to me enough where I was like, oh yeah, this sticks out. I remember this on my second watch. I was like, oh yeah, I remember this. But then I was just like, oh, I think they played this during the actual trailer too. And I watched that like half a dozen times. So that's probably why it stuck in my head. But what I really enjoy about the theme that runs throughout those pieces is that you have this kind of shrieking crescendo, and then it's an ascending sound and then a descending sound, but it sort of evokes the sound of a cat's meow in the way that it both goes up and then goes down, and it goes up and then it goes down, and it's just this sort of pensive, like nervous energy that you get as Catwoman's like stealing the jewels out of the person's house, or she's plotting her next move, or Batman and Alfred are kind of discussing this their next move and how they're going to try and go after Catwoman. And it is certainly the theme of the episode, and it was something that I felt stood out I was like, okay, this episode has a theme, a recurring theme that continually plays. And in all three pieces, or at least two of the three pieces, that same theme returns. So it's not something that I would necessarily hum. Like I could hum it now because it's in my head, but I may forget it a week from now. But it's something that at least the entire episode kind of has this theme. I like that it is sort of feline in nature in the way that the sound goes, with the strings going up and the strings going down and the strings going up. But yeah, I really, really thought that those pieces really set a theme for the entire episode, which certainly invokes more of the classic BTOS feel for music and is a little bit different than what we experienced, I feel like, for our first two episodes.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that we noted, or that was noted, I think, by James Tucker and Bruce Timm when they were doing the show, is that this version of Catwoman, they really kind of saw her as, this old Hollywood character. I think they specifically threw out Barbara Stanwyck in the film The Lady Eve as like a reference to her, and I think the score really embodies that sort of old Hollywood starlet. Sort of this like sultry, again, it kind of plays into that noir, like, and then the dame walked in, like it kind of feels that way a little bit when that music, especially when there's that, that the very sort of, the main, what I would consider like kind of the main like Batman Catwoman love theme kicks in, when she kisses him for the first time, and that sort of thing. Like it has this very it's this very sultry tune. It's like I think there's notes of a harp in there as well, as well as, again, it's very, very heavily stringed, but I agree that it stood out a little bit more, and I felt like I noticed a little bit more of them mixing in the main theme, the Caped Crusader theme that you hear in the intro every week for when Batman appeared, much the same you would on several other Batman properties. So I appreciated that, and kind of the way that theme goes in and out amongst the Catwoman theme as well. I think this episode really stands out. I don't necessarily know this is intentional so much as it is just sort of, I think this covers similar ground, even though the characterizations are very different, to the Matt Reeves, who obviously was a producer on this show, his version of Catwoman with Zoe Kravitz in The Batman, the live action movie. I feel like the Catwoman theme is a little bit similar there. If you listen to one and then the other, it's not, they aren't the same notes or anything. Like I don't think Mr. Weidman was trying to parody Michael Giacchino's score or anything, but I think he is. I think it does kind of evoke that same thing. Which, I mean, if you've seen that movie, Catwoman does kind of represent the same sort of thing that we see Batman wrestling with here, in a different way, but where she is kind of one of the first people to kind of get through the armor, literally and figuratively, in the Batman, and much, again, we talked about how sort of the obsession that he sort of maybe has, even if he won't admit it to himself, that he has with her, and sort of the and that sort of feeling of this person you can't stop thinking about. And I feel like that really comes through in the theme. Like it has this really sort of sultry tone to it, and again, I think it really does a good job of evoking that sort of old Hollywood romance films to me. Not that I'm an expert on all Hollywood scores, but again, you feel like it has that vibe.
For sure. Yeah.
I should clarify. And then the only other note I had, I just talked about how I'm trying not to compare this to BTAS as much as I can, but to me, again, a great use of the Batman theme in this episode during that scene we've already talked about several times, where young Bruce is saying, "I'm going to make them pay." You kind of hear that theme brought in. And again, much like Shirley Walker uses in that Batcave theme in Mask of the Phantasm, it evokes a much different emotion hearing it, seeing this stone-faced 8-year-old boy with revenge in his eyes than when you hear it when it's Batman standing on the rooftop with his cape flowing in the wind. Like, it's like, oh, this is it again. Like you said, it becomes a horror movie for a moment. It becomes like this really kind of really sad and depressing moment when you hear the Batman theme kick in there, like this inevitability. And the music does such a great job of playing that up, using again the same music we've already heard several times as the superhero theme. So a great use of the same piece of music being used in a very different way in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this one is very strong. As you mentioned, those are some great highlights also outside of the ones that I mentioned. And for all of those reasons, I ended up giving this a very strong 9 out of 10 for the music. I think it really just drives a lot of the episode. It really does create atmosphere in some of those scenes. The sequence of Bruce standing at the bottom of the bed, we keep coming back to it, but it's such a powerful image. And then to accompany that with such a powerful score to really drive home exactly what you're seeing is really great. And then, like I said, I just love the pieces that Mr. Weidman wrote for this. So yeah, 9 out of 10, really strong for me. What about you?
Yeah, I actually went with the exact same score of a 9 out of 10. Yeah, it's really solid. And again, I think we talked about kind of waiting to be wowed by the music after the first 2 episodes. And not that we didn't like, I don't think either of us disliked the score in the first 2 episodes, but yeah, this one again, I think by having those overt character themes like we talked about, I think that does immediately make the episode stand out a little bit more and make you take a little bit more notice.
All right, Liam, let's move on to our final category of the day, which is going to be our voice acting. We'll talk a little bit about our voice cast here, including a very familiar name as our Catwoman, and then, of course, not a huge supporting cast this week for a change. So, certainly some series regulars to talk about, and then, of course, our leads for the episode. But let's go ahead and discuss this week's voice cast, shall we?
Absolutely. So I'll burn through some of these quickly since we've talked about them in recent weeks, and they're playing some of our side characters. We have Yuri Lowenthal once again. He's playing Detective Cohen, who I think is the one that's kind of insulting Bullock and making fun of him for not being able to get the collar, so to speak, on Selina Kyle. We once again have Gray Delisle, Gray Griffin, as she's playing the nameless newscaster, not for the last time in this season, spoiler alert, and also the radio voice as well. Jeff Bennett is playing, I think, a couple of the other police officers. He's the detective in the flashback who's sort of asking young Bruce the questions. And then we get into a few of our media roles here. Making her first appearance is Jamie Chung as Dr. Harleen Quinzel. As mentioned, she's not Harley herself just yet, but you would probably know her from a lot of her other voice work. She was in Big Hero 6. She's also she had a live action role in the Gotham series. So something about young Batman projects, I guess, just speak to her. But yeah, again, she has a very minor role here, and Bruce Timm and Jabe Sucker talked about this. Their idea was sort of, let's flip-flop the personalities a little bit and have Harleen be a little bit lighter and bubblier, and have the other side be more domineering when her Harley Quinn persona surfaces. I don't really get that in this episode, as we'll talk about when she makes subsequent appearances leading up to that Harley Quinn episode. I think it comes through better. And because in this episode, she is pretty much, almost from minute one, it feels like you can just tell that she does not like Bruce Wayne. And as you said, clearly there's an issue here of just the way she views all rich men, all of the wealthy in the city. And her mind seemed to be cut from the same cloth. So
we're laying some breadcrumbs here.
Yes. Yeah. Not a lot of is asked of her in this one, but yeah, she's doing some work that will be she's planting the seeds now for later episodes. But elsewhere in the plot, we do have Tom Kenny voicing Eel O'Brien. This is a reuniting of him with this character as he plays Plastic Man / E.L. O'Brien in Batman and the Brave and the Bold. So he's also just a great. I mean, Tom Kenny. He's the voice of SpongeBob. If we haven't mentioned that yet this week, one of the most prolific and famous voice actors in the world, at least in the United States. And what a great 1930s voice guy, right? Like he's just like even if he wasn't playing the same character he'd played in another series, it's like he's just got that weird transatlantic mid-Atlantic accent that everybody talked with in movies and TV at that era. Like it's almost his natural speaking voice if you've ever heard interviews with him. So he's kind of just feels like he's just kind of pitching that up to 11 and really just going with that. Hey, see what's going on? Like he's got that kind of that sort of quality to his voice naturally, and he just kind of plays it up as Eel, who actually does end up playing kind of an important part, as we mentioned, of being the guy who gets the photos of Catwoman at the end.
Yeah, it leads me to believe somebody with such a legendary status. I mean, it happens. We certainly saw it enough times in other cartoons and other DCAU shows where someone was assigned a role for a bit part and they were either well-known at the time or became well-known later. But it would seem to me, especially since this character has its roots potentially in a particular hero down the line, that we might not have seen the last of this character here. So yeah, he does enough in the show. He has his interactions certainly at the beginning. I love when he's like narrating himself taking the photos of this councilman who's up to no good, and he's like really, really excited over the fact that he's caught this councilman in a position that is compromising, and that he's going to get the dirt on this guy, which kind of leads you to believe like, oh, maybe this guy's more of a tabloid guy than he is an actual journalist. But his interactions with Batman are great, and I love at the end we kind of learn a little bit about him because he's willing to, whether it's out of fear or whatever, not print the photos of Batman, but Batman's just like, no, go ahead and print them. So I love that little interaction that they have there at the end. So I hope to see more of him later on. He's a legend, and would certainly love to see him doing more of this fantastic 1930s movie actor voice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he does a great job again in sort of a smaller role. We'll mention here again, talk about maximizing your minutes. Playing the young Bruce Wayne is Santino Bernard. Really good. Again, we've talked in the past about the mixed bag of casting actual children to play a child's role, or in these types of animated projects. Again, I feel like we keep coming back to that scene, but really good in what is really only a few words that he's asked to speak. Really, really effective.
Yeah, I would agree. He only needed to really deliver that one line about making them pay, and like I think the rest of his interactions, I don't know that he says much of anything other than that one. Like that's the whole thing, right? I don't think he says anything other than that one line.
He has. I think he says one thing to the cop. He says like, I don't even.
Oh, that's right.
The gun. He kind of hesitates.
But he comes across as a very disturbed child. So excellent casting, in my opinion. As you said, that can have some mixed results based on casting someone of a younger age in those positions. But I think he delivered the line that you needed him to with enough creepiness that it's paid off.
Absolutely. And from there, we'll just mention a couple of our other regulars. John DiMaggio as Bullock and Gary Anthony Williams as Flash. Once again, as we mentioned, they get to play a little bit of a larger role this week because they're sort of shown up and embarrassed by Catwoman, and then sort of want to take more specific bloody revenge against her later on. And then voicing Selina's maid / housekeeper Greta is Jackie Hoffman, who people would probably know most recently. She is one of sort of the wacky neighbor characters on the Only Murders in the Building TV series with Steve Martin and Martin Short and Selena Gomez. She's kind of one of the wacky neighbors on that show, but she's been in other things like Garden State and Birdman as well. I heard, again, we talk about how so much of this episode is so dark and brooding, and beginning to sort of dig our hands into the dark psychosis of Batman. And on the other side, we just have this really fed up German housekeeper who hates her boss. And yeah, she's pretty fun in that role. Like it almost does feel like it's from a different show. Like it feels more, it's like a bit that would be suited for, say, like a Brave and the Bold, but it's kind of a welcome bit of levity. And in a weird way, as mentioned, it does kind of create this sort of, it adds to the dichotomy of Bruce and Batman, and by extension his relationship with his butler, and then Selina's relationship with hers, and how ultimately the first chance she gets, Greta's on the first ship out of there.
Yeah, at times it feels like, as you mentioned, the character itself feels a bit out of place. Like it's like a Family Guy character or something. Like it just kind of stands out as like, I don't know that this fits with the tone.
Yeah. But like very, very like old sitcom too, right? Like
Flintstones, like is meta enough, like is trying to break the fourth wall in a way where she's like talking to no one about the situation, but it's not that overt, obviously. So I think it, as you mentioned, it's just a bit of humor that's meant to sort of break up the seriousness and in-depth psychological profile of our Batman. So the fact that Catwoman's ultimate comeuppance comes from her is certainly funny. And that's how Catwoman is, the consequences that Catwoman eventually has to face catch up with her. She has deadpan delivery from the beginning, doesn't really have much emotion until she says Avita Shane at the end, and it's hilarious. Like, Avita Shane at the end. She's like, goodbye. Like, that's it. She's done. Very funny.
Absolutely. And then as we get towards the end here, again, mentioning some of our regulars, Diedrich Bader's Harvey Dent in his brief appearance, Crystal Joy Brown as Barbara Gordon, kind of continuing their ongoing two sides of the legal system battle. And then we get to our main players. First up, we'll just talk here because we've already kind of talked about all the best stuff, but Jason Watkins as Alfred in this episode, really, really good. Like I said, I think it really paints Alfred in a really interesting light as a much more tragic character himself, as opposed to just being a guy standing next to the person who has all of the tragedy. And how, like I said, you really feel for him as someone who wants to care for and love this broken boy who is unable to or does not want to accept that love or that care. So he does a great job in this episode, both in the flashbacks and his sort of constant sort of trying so hard to nudge Bruce towards any sort of peace of mind, and being kind of chided and knocked down at every turn. Mr. Watkins does a great job in this one.
Yeah, he's great. Somebody commented, I don't remember if it was on one of our reels that we posted at DCAU Review on Instagram or whether it was on Twitter, but somebody commented about how this Alfred's voice is really, really like a formidable follow-up to Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. Like, we talk about that all the time, how it's really hard he would call him #myAlfred on the show. So it's really hard to follow that performance up with something. And obviously this is a little bit of a different take. He does have some of the sarcasm. We've seen that so far, but like, he's not quite as sardonic as we're used to with our Alfred. It's a different characterization of him, but he does feel warm. He feels sad in a way that I just don't think that we've experienced in our Alfred characterization before, and the fact that he really delivers that authentically. It's like we talk about in that scene, speaking of Aquaphantasmonth Forever, but the scene where Bruce puts on the costume for the first time and Alfred is shocked and scared and terrified of who Batman has become. It's like that, except it's extrapolated across the entire first season here, where we continually see that Alfred is wanting, trying to push Bruce towards a better life and have a different relationship, a more emotional relationship with Bruce, like force him to open up in some form or fashion, even if it's just to him. And Bruce doesn't want anything to do with that. And so then we get the reaction on Alfred's side. So yeah, we get a lot of that play in this episode, and he does a wonderful job of sort of evoking that tragic element that you mentioned that I don't think that we've seen in our prior Alfreds.
Absolutely. And then we have as our main villainess for this week, we have Christina Ricci as Selina Kyle. As we talked about her back when the casting was first announced in one of the bonus episodes. I think I said, and I reiterated it thinking about it today in my notes. It's like, it feels like there was a time where Christina Ricci could have just played Catwoman in live action.
For sure.
If the right movie had been made at the right time. But yeah, I think she's pretty fun in this as a foil, again, in many different ways to Batman and even to Bruce Wayne. I think maybe one of my favorite scenes, honestly, is that first scene in the museum when she and Bruce are sort of playing off of each other. I think there's something immediate where you feel like she has this, and again, credit to your voice director and your writers and all of that as well. But it feels like she really had an idea of who this character is from minute one when it comes to her. So I really enjoyed her as a Catwoman in this case.
Yeah, she's great. She doesn't. I mean, we see a couple of different emotions that he has to see. I think the funniest bit, like, she's funny throughout, and that's the thing. She's like the brevity. She's the very non-serious character that kind of lightens the mood, as we've talked about. But when she's in the courtroom and she has to play like the poor victim, and she's so sorry that she did it and it'll never happen again. That, speaking of like 1930s bits, like that felt very much invoking an actress of that period of time that would use that type of over the top, just emotional delivery to evoke emotion and sadness. And in this case, it's being done obviously as she's very unserious about it, because she goes back out in her car and decides to paint it like a cat. So in order to steal more jewels. So it is funny that we kind of get her showing an array of emotions, her frustration and disappointment at the end, and shock, when Greta leaves her at the end and gets foiled by that, is funny. So yeah, I think she does a wonderful job. I think that it'll be interesting to see if there's an evolution to this character, if she's able to kind of evolve with that. If the character stays the same and is this continually light, poppy, unserious character, that obviously won't be her fault. That's the characterization. I think that she will continue to be able to pull that off, regardless. But yeah, she's a long time actress that has been in acting since she was literally in her teens or younger, when she was in the Addams Family and played Wednesday Addams. So she's been around a long time. We've talked about how that doesn't always translate from the visual screen to voice acting, but I think in this case, to your point, she did a wonderful job and has some really funny lines that she delivers well.
Yeah, I think, and we talked about this, and I know I saw some people talking about it on the socials. I try not to look at that stuff, but you can't help it. About, again, I think the more modern take on Catwoman, that she grew up on the streets. In some versions, she's even like involved in prostitution at a young age and all of that stuff, and how some people feel like that's so inherent to the character now you can't go backwards. And I certainly understand that impression, but I think for this version, which again is so steeped in the early golden age, I think it fits a lot better to have her be just like, especially for what her point is in this story, which is again to sort of challenge and challenge Batman from a psychological level as much as in a physical level. I think it's fun to have her be sort of this more just kind of, she's just this vapid would-be heiress that spent all of her dad's money and is like, well, I guess I'll be a supervillain now. I think she does a great job embodying that side of it. So again, yes, and in subsequent appearances, who knows? Maybe you see her, like perhaps we'll see with Batman himself. Maybe she'll mature more into that the version of the character that people are more familiar with now. So we've got time, folks. But other than that, we just got to touch on Hamish Linklater once again as Batman / Bruce Wayne. And again, as we kind of touched on at the top, if there was a complaint that he wasn't present enough in the previous episode, I would say that that problem is kind of laid to rest in this episode. We certainly know what he's thinking, I think, at all times when he's on the screen in this one.
Yeah, we get. I guess there's probably more screen time for Bruce than Batman. So if you're going to nitpick and split hairs here, then I'm sure that would be a complaint. But you really do get the idea that the mask, as we've reiterated, that they went ahead and continued that tradition of Bruce Wayne being the mask and Batman is the character here. It really is driven home as we get him sitting there in front of this doctor who is psychoanalyzing him and is really sort of pigeonholed him into exactly who he is. And he's still just kind of deadpan looking in the face, smiling, joking, talking, he's even making subtle jokes. He makes the joke about, he was out with a lady friend late last night as after an interaction with Catwoman. He says that in his bit with Harley Quinn, obviously alluding to some sort of tryst that Bruce Wayne was involved in, not admitting that he's Batman, but very, very funny that he's kind of able to keep that persona up. And I really felt, I think as we mentioned, Mr. Linklater mentioned that he tried to model his Bruce Wayne or his Batman after Kevin Conroy, but to mixed results, his own words. Like he said that he listened back and was like, oh, well, I didn't really channel it very well. I think his Bruce Wayne is much closer to Kevin Conroy's Bruce Wayne than it is the Batman is close to his Batman. And I think that's a good thing because I think that was one of the things that we constantly have praised the late, great Mr. Conroy for, being able to deliver those lines and feel like this is authentic, like make it feel like it's not, like we know it's a mask. And in this case, Harley Quinn knows, or Dr. Quinzel knows it's a mask, or assumes it's a mask. But the fact that he's able to sincerely deliver these lines, and it feels like he's just it feels like he's smiling while he's speaking, which really it really just, I think, authentically conveys that what they're going for with this characterization of Bruce. He has something to hide. This is a mask. This isn't who he really is. But he's really good and has been, as we've seen in this episode, since he was 8 years old, at stuffing this down and making this his public persona of he's a himbo, he's a womanizer, he's a ladies' man, he's interested in getting into trouble with Harvey Dent and drinking and dating every rich socialite in Gotham. And I think that comes across very well here. And then in those moments where he has to be cold and heartless, it feels like, towards Alfred and in the Batcave when he's doing his investigation, or his interactions even with Catwoman, where he's like, "You're wasting my time." Yeah. Like he just has no patience for her, even though he's engaging. He's like, "I could be out doing something far better, and you're wasting my time." I think that it's wonderful. Like I love this episode, and the fact that he was able to kind of show off that difference between the two personas, I think is really effective for the episode and his performance.
Yeah, and we already talked about it at length, so we don't really need to go too much into it again. But there's that idea of he's talking about what a waste of time she is and how he's happy to have a break from her at the end. But at the same time, when Alfred's like, I mean, all she's really doing is stealing jewels. Like, you could just leave this to the police and move on to another case. He has no answer for that. Like when he's asked to answer for any of these things, he either, in his Bruce Wayne persona, he kind of blows them off, or in the Alfred, when he's talking with Alfred in the cave, he just like cuts him off and starts a new sentence. And now it's my turn to talk. So yeah, I think he does a really good, solid job. I think everybody does, and I settled on an 8 out of 10 for my voice acting score this week.
Yeah, and I went. Sorry, you said 8 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I went the same exact score with mine, actually, an 8 out of 10 as well. I think it's a really strong all around voice cast and some really interesting moments for our leads, and a good showcase of the talent that we have in this series. All right, Liam, so that will begin to wrap things up here. So let's go ahead and total up our final scores for the episode. So we ended up with, totaling up everything at the end of my scores, I end up with a 31 out of 40 for my scores. What about you?
And I'm just a couple points higher at a 33 out of 40.
Right, so we're in the middle of the pack here as far as our first two episodes here. Last week's episode, we both scored a 34 this week. And the first week, I think we were a little bit lower. We're in the 20s with our scores for week one. So this one falls right in between there, which feels about right.
Yeah. I think this will be interesting because I think my first watch through, when the first series first debuted, this one I thought was pretty high. And again, not that 33, nothing to sneeze at. When the top score you can get is 40 on this show, but I'll be interested to see if any other episodes now, again under a more critical lens or on a second watching, if they stand out more to me and end up heads and shoulders above this one or not. So yeah, just as always, excited to watch more of the series and talk about it.
Absolutely. And talk about it we shall. And we'll preview that in just a moment here. But before we do, we'll, of course, thank our listeners for tuning in this week and the previous weeks. As I mentioned at the top, Liam, we've had more streams across all platforms here than I think any other previous episode before. So people are loving Batman Caped Crusader. Well, it's been some time. I don't know about previous episodes, but it's been some time since we've had the increase that we've seen for these. So we know that people are at least interested in revisiting the episodes, and obviously the excitement of the recency of their drop certainly has something to do with that. But we thank you for tuning in. If you want to support the podcast, we have a couple different ways so you can do that. Follow us on social media at DCAU Review on Twitter /X or Instagram. You can follow us both places. We've been posting more reels recently, trying to kind of feature our podcast a little bit, talk about the more funnier parts that and jokes that we tell, but also kind of talk a little bit about the things that people are interested in hearing about, and highlighting some different portions both of recent episodes and episodes in the past. So definitely check out our socials for that. As we mentioned at the top, you can also subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. That's we're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We're also available on YouTube on the Pod Tower. So subscribe to us wherever you listen to your podcasts, and support the podcast that way. And if it lets you leave a 5-star review or like the episode or comment on the episode or like the video, we certainly appreciate any engagement. We hate the word because it's a social media vortex term that we hate, but yeah,
I say we promise to never refer to our shows as content. All right, that's
only
our
in
one
jest.
rule.
we do it in jest sometimes, but
Yes.
It is never serious. It is never content. We don't create content. We have podcasts, and we enjoy the people that listen to them. So thank you. If you do subscribe, leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, and leave a 5-star review, and you leave a little blurb, send it to us on one of the socials. And if we read it on the air, we'll go ahead and send you a little thank you gift if you live within the continental United States. Don't forget also, you can check out the show notes. There are 2 ways to support us there. There's our link to our store. You can pick yourself up a piece of merchandise to support the podcast, or you can also become a monthly supporter. We have several people that do that on a monthly basis, and we appreciate those that give their hard-earned dollars to encourage us to keep going. So we appreciate that. Liam, as you mentioned, we are continuing here in our month of Batman Caped Crusader reviews, and believe it or not, we are coming towards the end of our initial Batman Caped Crusader month with a final review of the 4th episode of the series. We have discussed, pulling back the curtain, we have discussed on how we'd like to potentially review some more episodes down the line, but it certainly will not be in the immediate future. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we get to it. But stay tuned in. We appreciate the fact that you've given us a try this month, and maybe you'll like our reviews coming up after next week's episode. But Liam, episode 4, let's give it a little sneak preview and talk about what we're going to be reviewing next week.
That's right, and so next week it will be episode 4 of the series, that being entitled The Night of the Hunters, which is just a fantastic, that is such an old radio serial name of something.
Absolutely.
So,
anything that's the night of, absolutely.
Absolutely, and it was a sort of oft-forgotten, and there's even kind of a joke reference to this because of another Batman villain, which is like, you think of Firefly as like a D-lister, it's like, I guess this guy is F-list. It's going to be the first appearance of Firebug in this here animated series next week with the episode The Night of the Hunters.
Excited. That one also pulls from some classic Batman movies and literature also, so excited to talk about that one for our 4th and final Batman Caped Crusader review of the month. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the very next episode of the DCAU Review.
Goodbye.